Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Hey everyone, and welcome to Raising Parents, the Parenting Science Insights podcast, produced by Ella Massal, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Dina Sargent. Let's get started.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Marie, usually the host of Self-Improvement Atlas and Reloscope, but I'll be taking over Dina today while she's away. Today, we're looking at what overprotective parenting looks like, what results it produces, and what safe and productive parenting styles might be. And to guide us through this conversation is Professor Emeritus of Psychiatry at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center, Dr. David Allen. He's also the author of a self-help book, Coping with Critical, Demanding, and Dysfunctional Parents, Powerful Strategies to Help Adult Children Be Assertive and Stay Sane, as well as How Dysfunctional Families Spur Mental Disorders, a balanced approach to resolve problems and reconcile relationships, along with 3 other books for psychotherapists. Hi, David. It's lovely having you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
I must say, I am a huge fan of your comprehensive book titles.
I usually don't get two of them, but yeah, publishers like to do that.
Now, before we get started, I'd love to know about what sparked your interest in dysfunctional parenting and family dynamics. So could you tell us a bit about that?
Well, when I did my training in psychiatry back in the 70s, psychiatrists still did psychotherapy. Now they've kind of dropped it. Us old guys still do it, that are still in practice, but it sort of went to the lower cost psychologists, marriage and family counselors, and most of the therapists were analysts. But it was very important that we were taught that. And the first patient I had a condition which wasn't even in the book at the time, called borderline personality disorder. They were thought to be uncommon, and all of a sudden later on they became very common. And the story I always tell is she spent the first 2 or 3 sessions doing nothing but insulting me the whole time. She went to my supervisor and told him how inadequate I was, and I was ruining her. And the last therapist was a female. She was a goddess, but she wasn't really, because she left her and dumped her on me. And all of a sudden I was like, why does anybody act like this? So, and we weren't taught anything about family dynamics. The analysts were thinking everything happened in your head before you were 5 almost. That didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So I got kind of turned off to doing therapy for a while. And then I started running into more of these patients. People as I worked at a hospital for a while, people would cut and burn themselves in front of me. I had one small woman try to kill me. I wouldn't be here if I... And I'm wondering, she smashed the lamp on my desk and started coming after me. So I wrestled her to the floor, and finally the nurses got, why is anybody acting that way? I just had to figure it out. So I got involved in what they call the psychotherapy integration, because there's hundreds of different, quote, schools of thoughts about why people do self-destructive and self-defeating things. And a lot of people seem to think it's all a biological thing and genetic, and that's nonsense in a lot of the cases. And then a friend of mine introduced me to family systems therapy. And then the last family systems person I came was a fellow named Murray Bowen. He started talking about 3 generational models. And I started getting really interested in that. And then when I started finding out how the parents were treating these people, I sort of started to, no wonder you're acting that way. Again, if you don't know how to ask, they don't tell you, they don't volunteer. And the analyst never said to say, well, what does your mother think about this problem you have? Or what does your mother-in-law think about this problem you're having? Yeah. And then they started, because the people with borderline personality disorder are often accused of distorting everything, and they do. But they started bringing in tapes of parents they were talking to as adults when the parents didn't know they were being recorded on the phone. And I'm listening to this stuff, and the most amazing stuff starts to come out. And I did a lot of reading, and I started getting familiar with some historical and evolutionary psychological things that most people don't talk about, and also got very interested in something called groupthink, which is people all going along with the same ideas, even though there's evidence practically staring them in the face that the ideas are complete nonsense. There's a book called Willful Blindness, in fact, that talks about this in business, but it's definitely with your kin group.
Yeah.
So that's how I got interested, and then the overprotection thing has just been happening all around me since I was a kid. I grew up in the 50s, and when I grew up, all the mothers were still home because the feminist movement hadn't started yet. But all the kids are out playing. They walk to school. Now, if you let your kid walk to school, you'll come and arrest you. It got really crazy. And I started reading a lot and coming up with ideas about why this was going on. And there's a parenting columnist that I recommend named John Roseman, who he doesn't go into the same reasons that I do, but he talks a lot about people trying to be buddies with their kids. And it used to be if school sent a note home saying your kid was acting out, the parents would get mad at the kid. Now they go and they yell at the teacher. You probably heard about that.
Wow. What a story. What a story. So fascinating. And that's such a great preface to our topic for the day. But before we get further into detail, we'd love to get to know you better. This is Have You Met David? So my first question for you is, what is your favorite book?
Well, I don't read a lot of fiction, so I've read a lot of things that got me going. The thing that kind of got me the historical view is a book that came out in the 40s called Escape from Freedom, where it talked about how there's been an evolution of human consciousness that from a sort of collectiveness, whether you didn't have any individuality, you weren't Joe Blow who happened to be a knight or a farmer or something. That was all you were. There was nothing to separate you from anything else. Everybody lived together in farms and stuff like that. And since the Industrial Revolution, that's been changing, and individuality has been sort of evolving out of this sort of collectivism. And this sets up what sociologists call cultural lag, where people don't keep up with the changes in the culture. They get stuck in the old rules.
Yeah. And if you were to recommend this book to someone, what would your elevator pitch be? Or one-liner?
Well, it's
best selling points.
Yes, again, if you'd be interested in this topic, but it's just if you're interested in history and a whole new way of looking at human thinking, I think that was just kind of clued me into that. Later on, I found out that there were evolutionary psychologists that talked about something called kin selection, and it was politically incorrect. They weren't supposed to talk about it. Because it says that people kind of are willing to sacrifice under certain situations themselves for their kin group.
Yeah.
People go off to die in a war. Why would they do that? That doesn't help them reproduce and spread their genes. It doesn't work that way. And I found out, and this is where my ideas really are not the conventional wisdom at all. What I find is that in very confused families where people share a lot of these kind of conflicts caused by these crazy rule changes, the children sacrifice themselves to stabilize the parents, so they develop a sort of a false self or a persona that helps stabilize the parents. And a lot of parents are now conflicted about having children to begin with for various reasons, and that's maybe what we can really get into, which is why they've gone from one extreme to the other.
Yeah, for sure. I know that a lot of people my age are hesitant about reproducing for just the sole reason of what if I mess them up? Like that's too much pressure.
And there's all these cultural things going on to feed into that from both the right and the left politically. On the right, there was a woman named Phyllis Schlafly. You may have heard of her. That she was the one that fought against the Equal Rights Amendment, and she was going on about how you're going to ruin your children because you're not there with them 24 hours a day because you're at the job. And then on the other hand, you have the feminists saying, stay-at-home mothers are sort of lesser beings that aren't worth much.
Yeah.
And people are in the middle of this, and unfortunately, women still have the main responsibility.
Completely. And
taking care of children. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's also from what my friends say, well, there are some disorders that are genetic as well, and a lot of us are hesitant to reproduce for that very reason of like, what, like, I'm just going to reproduce to produce this child who didn't ask to come into this world and now has a genetic disorder like autism or ADHD or something like that. And I didn't want to be here. I don't think I'm gonna do that to someone either. So there's so many different reasons why people are
Well,
hesitant to reproduce.
well, sure, but there is some risk of autism. I think the ADHD is kind of a crock in a lot of ways. For most cases, there's some, they used to call it minimal brain dysfunction, people have dyslexia and things like that. But there's all kinds of environmental reasons why kids act out and don't pay attention. And the studies don't even control for any of them, not any of them. If it comes from a traumatic background, or there's family discord or alcoholism in the family, and a lot of them are sleep deprived because their parents let them stay up half the night playing video games.
Sure. I feel like there's so much to be discussed here, but before we get sidetracked.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I should, but my second question for you is, what movie have you enjoyed recently?
I went to see Killers of the Flower Moon. That was, again, if you're interested in history, that it's a tribalism, and you can see how obviously the Native Americans were treated, even in areas where it seemed like they got along with the whites. There was a lot of stuff going on in the background, and I hadn't heard a lot about a lot of this stuff. So it was really long, but yet it wasn't slow. It really kept.
It sounds really eye-opening.
Going.
It sounds really eye-opening. Are there any podcasts that you're listening to at the moment?
I listen to pieces of podcasts, but I'm not really stuck on any one.
What kinds of podcasts do you listen to?
Mostly sort of political and socio-cultural. And again, there's a lot of debate going on about cultural issues. With the two extremes. The ones that you got to say, you got to agree with everything people say, or you're traumatizing them, which I think is kind of nonsense. And on the other hand, you can't discuss real history. You've got to whitewash it. So again, that's all tied in with groupthink. I co-edited a book called Groupthink in Science. It came out a couple of years ago, and so that's all kind of part of
completely
what's going on here.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of the media that you consume are incredibly thought-provoking. Is there any kind of media that you consume just to relax a bit?
Oh, gee, well, I watch a lot of movies.
What kind of movies get you to relax?
Well, I like dramas. I don't know. I'm not. Comedies have kind of gone downhill lately. I don't know. I always liked drama. I grew up in within a few miles of 4 movie studios, so I've always handicapped the Oscars every year and see all the major nominees.
Oh, are you living in LA?
Well, that's where I'm from. Now I'm in a suburb of Memphis.
Ah, cool. Do you miss LA at all?
Well, we go back a lot, but it's one of the reasons we left. I mostly did it to get an academic job, but it's got so crowded. I mean, everybody moved there.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like everyone's moving there. I knew someone here in Melbourne who just moved to LA.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Like, why is everyone moving there?
Yeah, the traffic and it was always bad, but now it's you can barely move. When you go there.
Yeah. So do you have a role model in life, be in personal life or professional life?
Well, again, some of the theorists that I read have been kind of that guy, Murray Bowen, that I mentioned. My model that I developed for doing therapy for people with severe self-destructive behavior is modeled after his, although it's actually modeled after criticism of his. He was the one that looked at 3 generational models, but then when he sent people back to renegotiate things with their families, he taught them to use kind of tricks that other therapists use instead of discussing how did we get here and how do we get past everybody's defenses and defensiveness and solve the problem, because people are scared to death to talk about this stuff.
Yeah. And what qualities of his do you admire?
Well, the fact that he let himself think about things. I think he was wrong about things. He applied it to schizophrenia, which is a whole other issue that I won't get into here. It's another. People think I'm anti-psychiatry drugs. Well, I'm not if they're appropriately used, and there are brain diseases. Schizophrenia, I think, is one of them. Personality disorders, I do not think, are brain diseases at all, because brain disease isn't present only when you're with certain people, but not when you're with other people, or in certain situations, or when you're being watched, or when you're not being watched.
I feel like it's probably important to also just like acknowledge that in order to get on the right path or make any kind of progress, you've got to get it wrong first too. And that's what's important. So thank you so much for answering my questions. I feel like I got to know you a bit better. Now we're moving on to the interview section. And the first question that we like to ask is, what do you think parenting is? What is your personal definition of parenting? This can differ from person to person, obviously. So we'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, that's a big, broad question. I mean, there's a lot of things parents have to do, but interestingly enough, when I was a resident, there was a child psychiatrist who kind of boiled it down to what he called the 3 L's. First one was love, of course. Love the kids and make them feel valued. The other one was limits. You can't just let them run loose. And you're the adult in the house. You're in charge. They don't make the decisions.
Yeah.
If you try and explain to a 4-year-old why you're explaining that, and when was the last time any 4-year-old says, "Well, I'm glad that you mentioned that. I see your point." They don't do that. And the last one was let them go. That's the one we
that
need
sounds
to,
like the toughest part, letting them go.
let them go. But you've got to the point where the parents think they've got to protect their children from everything, and that is the worst thing you can do for a kid, because it gives the message, I need to protect you. And again, I view it as they're good. Not that they don't learn how to stand up for themselves. They could, because as one comedian once said, they don't live in a cave and don't get cable, so they can see what other people are doing. So it's not that they don't know how to do it, really, but they get the message that they're not supposed to, because the parent is going to fall apart if they can't parent, and then the parent feels guilt, and when it gets really severe, then the parents are also angry with them at the same time. So it's like, I need you and I hate you. That's what sort of behind borderline personality disorder. What I've seen is parents are very, very conflicted over having children to begin with.
Yeah.
Especially when they're hearing all these negative stuff about it.
Yeah.
And
so what do you think expectant parents need to be aware of in transition to parenthood?
Well, again, it's a broad question. When obviously babies are a whole different ball of wax.
Yeah.
You kind of do a lot more. The first child is tough, because they're up all night. You're up all night. You're not used to it. You don't know what to do if they start crying. How many times you should go back in, and all that. So, but hopefully you can talk to. But there's there are parenting classes. It's stressing that word parenting.
Yeah.
It used to be raising children. Now it's parenting, like.
Yeah. I might be an outlier here, because my parents always say that, so I'm the first child, and they always say that I was the easiest one to deal with. I think
your parents were lucky.
Yeah, I think they were just lucky, because I just slept a lot. Just never talked, never did anything, and slept a lot. So, got lucky there for them. So tell us a bit more about what expectant parents need to consider.
Well, again, what are you going to, first of all, they've got to be on the same page with parenting or raising children. If they have a major disagreement about how they're going to relate to the kid, that's going to be bad. The kid's going to pick up on it eventually, and they're going to set one parent off against the other. Yeah.
And it's also going to be confusing for the child, I imagine, if like one parents this way and the other parent does it a completely different way.
Or one undermines the other was, your mom said you can't. Oh yeah, go ahead. You can do it. Yeah. And
then in the child's mind, it's like, oh, mommy's great, daddy's awful, or something like that.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. But they don't know. Sometimes it changes. There was a whole family systems paradigm about what they call cross-generational boundaries, like mom and sis would gang up against dad and bro and stuff like that. This guy, Salvador Minuchin, one of the family systems pioneers, talked a lot about that. And that was, for him, the hallmark of a dysfunctional family. I think it's one of the hallmarks.
So to start off, can you define what overprotective parenting is and how it differs from being a caring and attentive parent?
Well, you got to let the kid learn how to do things. It's interesting that people don't remember their kids yelling, "I want to do it myself." They all do that, but it's like parents seem to think that they shouldn't have to do anything that, so they want to take over everything and protect them from everything that you can't protect them from everything that happens. Let them cry once in a while. A baby, you can't just let them cry forever. But I knew a couple where when their kid was 2 or 3, they would drive him around for 3 or 4 hours a night until he fell asleep, instead of just putting him in bed, letting him cry.
Yeah.
Not good.
Yeah.
So you have to balance, taking, looking and seeing if they're in actual distress that you really do need something, like if they're sick or something like that. Yeah. But if they're just like fighting with a sibling, you stay out of it unless it gets physical. Then you have to. But if you try to talk between the two of them to settle it, then they don't learn how to get along. They all come on you to settle it.
So roughly at what point in the child's life do parents need to be more aware of this potential overprotective parenting that they are establishing?
Well, it gradually, as the kid gets older, but certainly by the time they get the kids at school, it's really time to back off. Like, a lot of people with so-called school phobia, it's really the parents that are afraid to leave the kid, believe it or not. The kid cries and the parents stick around. If the parents say, well, you'll stop crying, and they leave, then the kids stop crying and nothing ever happens. They're fine.
Oh yeah, for sure. For sure. I definitely, I have a core memory about this, something similar, where like during kindergarten, I used to cry when my parents would leave me, but I'd cry for a while because I knew they'd stick around if I cried longer. But the moments they left for a while and I knew they were gone, I was like, all right, I can't do anything anymore. Like, and I just shut up and kind of like suck it up.
Well, it's things like that and they're very common. The parents are, and like I said, they're defending the kids, but the teacher says they're acting out and blaming the teacher, and you just can't do something. Let me see if I have any. The most important relationship in the house is not between the parents and the children; it's between the parents. If that's not the most important relationship in the house, you're gonna have problems with the kid.
Could you elaborate on that?
Well, if the parents need a break and they have some way of arranging for childcare, it's okay. They can do it. Avoiding each other because they're ferrying the kids to every kind of soccer practice and 5,000 other events and stuff like that. That's not good for the marriage. Yeah, it's a matter of balance. It's not all the needs of the individual versus the needs of the group. It's a balance between the two, and that's what's key, is to have some kind of happy medium where you're not totally sacrificing everything you want because you think your kids need it. They don't. In fact, if you do that, they're going to start doing the wrong thing. An example I like to give of this sort of thing. Sometimes you hear teenagers yelling at their father who's always lecturing them. Why do I have to listen to this? And you think, well, you don't. All you have to do is do what you're told, and then you wouldn't have to lecture.
Yeah.
But the kid is leaving out part of the sentence. It's, why do I have to listen to this in order to keep you happy? Because you like to lecture. That's what he thinks, the kid. If you are constantly taking your kid's room apart looking for alcohol or drugs, the odds that they're going to use alcohol or drugs is going to go up because they think you want to find it.
They're just going to find, they're just going to find more ways to hide it and to sneak around.
Okay, but they'll leave it so it will be found eventually.
Oh, they will?
Yeah, it's like people that hide bottles, the alcoholics that hide bottles. They're always found.
Interesting.
Another joke I stole is that the reason we don't have any good animal models for alcoholism is because they can't find any rats that hide the bottles. It's just that you just can't.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of this behavior is a lot more purposeful than, I mean, it's done automatically and without thinking. So it's subconscious, but it really is, people know what they're doing at some level.
So potentially, what are the motivations of overprotective parents?
Well, I think the biggest one is guilt. Okay. And this is hard because it's been going on for it's been developing over several generations, and it has to do with gender roles. And again, I'm not saying that it's not a good thing that women can now do a lot of things that they weren't able to do before. I think that's great. But because of the environment, they get all these double messages, and particularly they get them from their parents and grandparents. I call this sort of the Rosie the Riveter phenomenon. What happened before, not too long before World War II, most people were living in farms. The more children you had, the richer you were because they were your farm help. And only women could have babies, and there was a high infant mortality rate. So it made sense for them to be home and feminists probably kill me for saying this, but it made some sense for them to be home and having a lot of babies. Well, gradually everybody started moving to cities where that wasn't the case, and there were schools and daycare centers and microwave ovens and all kinds of other things that were kind of. But then World War II broke out, and that may seem like a long time ago, but it's my parents' generation.
Yeah.
And because all the men went to war, there was this Rosie the Riveter where all the women took these jobs, and they found they really liked having the camaraderie and all the praise they got, and they liked having a career. But then World War II ended, and all the men came home. Well, what happened? There were literally, and I've seen them, government propaganda films that said, "Nice job, girls, but it's time to go back and get barefoot and pregnant again."
Ooh.
I am not kidding. That was the message, and that's why I'm here. That was the baby boom generation. Well, guess when the baby boom generation grew up? In the 60s. Well, what happened in the 60s? The feminist movement. And you hear Betty Friedan saying, you can be an astronaut, you can be a doctor, you don't have to be a nurse, you can be anything that you want to be. And they'd come back and they'd be so excited about it. They'd go home and tell their mothers about it. Their mothers would have a heart attack. Why? Because it reminded them of what they got to do and couldn't do anymore because their family wouldn't accept it anymore. So that led to a situation where the mothers had kind of repressed ambition that they couldn't really do much with. And they would sometimes push their daughters to do the things they kind of wanted to do, or even their sons. I mean, I'm probably a doctor because my mom pushed me into it. Because I think she wanted to be a doctor.
Yeah.
But
it's kind of like living vicariously through them.
Right. But then if their daughter is too successful, guess what happens then? Then they get envious and resentful because the reason they couldn't do it was because they had you. Okay. So that you're getting a double message from your family.
Yeah. It's like, I'm proud of you, but I kind of resent you.
And I'm envious of you.
Yeah.
And they can't talk about it because they can't admit that they really wanted to have a career in the first place because their parents would never have accepted it. Okay. And that's what it is. People, if you can't talk about it, you can't solve the problem. So, and then there was a thing where the missing children came out. There were pictures on milk cartons of missing kids. And everybody was panicked, but there were no more stranger abductions back then before the pictures on the milk carton than there are now. It's usually another parent or something. There are a few, of course, but it's not dangerous for kids to ride bikes. When I first moved to the suburb of Memphis that I'm in, I still don't know how many kids there are on this block. They're never out playing. And it's not just because they're stuck at home with their screams, because when the pandemic went, I saw them out with bicycles, with their parents riding bicycles. All of a sudden, where were these kids before? They appeared out of nowhere. So, and at work, you're not working enough hours. You aren't going to be eligible for a promotion. So you're feeling guilty at work, and you're feeling like you're neglecting your children when you're really not. It's funny because they did a study that showed that my parents' generation actually spent less time with their kids than today's generations, which is
wow.
Because they go home and that's all they do is spend time with their kids.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, in thinking about it, I just never thought that was the reality of it. So how does what you've told me connect to the motivations of overprotective parents
Oh, yeah.
now?
Well, if they think they're going to harm their kids because they're not there enough for them, they're going to overcompensate. And they do too much. And they try to protect them from every kind of hurt. It's on college campuses. There's a book right now called The Counseling of the American Mind. It was another one before that by the same author that was talking about what's going on college campuses, like safe spaces and microaggressions. It's like these kids fall apart. And when that, I think, my opinion, just opinion, I can't prove it, I think they rise in overdoses, suicides, and all kinds of other problems with kids is because of this. There were no kids running around the room when I was in the third or fourth grade. One, now you go in and they're all over the place, and the kids and the teachers are afraid to discipline them because the principal won't support them if the parents come.
Yeah. Yeah. And are there any societal or cultural factors that contribute to this parenting style?
Well, I mentioned them earlier with all these mixed messages they're getting from everybody, including from their own families, about how much time you need to spend with your kids and are you doing the right job? And there's all this confusion. And like I said, this guy, John Roseman, has been writing about this for a long time. I don't agree with everything he says, but he really talks about how to set limits with kids. And he talks about three kinds of parenting. There's the passive kind where you just let the kid get away with murder. Then there's the authoritarian where you're basically beating the crap out of them and telling them you do this, you do that, I'm your master of that. And then there's the authoritative kind, which is the kind he recommends, where you're the boss, you speak kindly but firmly, and you set the limits. If you want them to do chores, it's not, I want you to do the dishes tonight. It's, you'll do the dishes tonight. Matter of fact. And if they say, why? You go, because I told you so. That was supposedly ruled out. You're not supposed to ever. You're supposed to sit down and explain to your kid why they should do chores around the house. Really? Why? They can figure it out pretty much themselves. You don't have to explain it. And if you're reasonable about it, I'm not talking because they're unreasonable authority, telling them to do all kinds of stuff. And you have to support something else about your child, which psychotherapists call self-actualization. They are not just a peg in a machine, okay? They have their own wants, ideas, tendencies. Let them develop them. They don't have to do everything you did.
Yeah, absolutely. And is there any research that shows the effects overprotective parenting versus authoritative parenting has on a child's overall development?
I'm pretty sure there is. There's not enough of it because it's hard to know exactly what's going on at home. There was an excellent TV show called The Nanny, where they actually brought cameras into the house to find out why the kid was acting out. Because if you ask people, they either don't know or they don't tell you the truth. So you put cameras in the house, and then you can see what's going on. It's like me listening to those phone calls from my patients.
Yeah.
And then I started inviting the parents in, and some of them were on their best behavior, but some of them weren't.
And tell us about the takeaways you had from that TV show.
Well, again, it showed that they were either the parents weren't getting along and they were disagreeing, or they were giving the kid mixed messages, or they weren't setting limits, or they were too rough on the setting limits. Mixed messages is another huge issue in people that are self-destructive. They get this confusing message from the parents. This is sort of not quite the same thing, but say your mother's always compulsively cleaning the house and while complaining that nobody helps her. But then if you try to help her, it's never done right. It's never good enough. Well, how do you make her happy?
Yeah.
Well, one way to do it is you make more of a mess. Why? Well, because then she gets to clean the house, which is obviously what she wants to do. Plus, she can be mad at you. Now she's got a reason to be mad at it. You just have to feel bad about it.
Either that, or you might not even try.
Or, well, you wouldn't try. I mean,
yeah.
Because
why?
Why bother?
Yeah, completely.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
That's sort of a minor issue, but if it's over a major issue, like if your mom's constantly after you to get married, say, when are you going to have a grandchildren, blah, blah, blah. But she's also always talking about what jerks all men are, including your father. Okay, how do you solve that?
Yeah, what
Well, you go
you
out
want
with
me to do?
you go out with a series of jerks
Yeah.
because you're doing what your mom's telling you and you're proving your point. Okay, but those are extreme examples, but there are a lot more milder examples where kids you're getting a double message like, well, don't do that. Heaven forbid you should want to be you don't want to be a lawyer, or you want to be a forest ranger or something. Can't have that.
So what are the specific situations or contexts in which overprotective parenting can be more prevalent or problematic?
Well, it's pretty much a constant thing. That's the problem. It's getting worse rather than better. I'm not sure exactly what I haven't what other kind of context besides what I've mentioned.
For example, like in what area would overprotective parenting result in disruptive behavior from the child on the child's part, or would result in a child having emotional attachment issues, for example?
Well, it again, if it's a single message, it's going to result in low self-esteem. Like nobody thinks I can do anything, and then I'm a snowflake, basically. Use a political term again. You get it that you can't tolerate, and that's what the colleges are talking about with the safe spaces. And people can't come in, and they use the wrong word accidentally. They get kids traumatized. They are writing up complaints and everything. It's really so that's one situation. If it's a mixed message, then you could end up with somebody with a bit major personality disorder, very self-destructive.
And with regards to the parent-child relationship and how overprotective parenting can have a huge effect on that relationship, how can those dynamics strain or alter the relationship over time? What are some of the possibilities? For example, would the child end up resenting their parents or just trying to seek that validation from somewhere else?
Sometimes, but usually, again, they don't really get it. This gets into family dynamics again. You tend to pick a mate with the sort of the same issues that your family has, because you're familiar with it. It's comfortable. Again, I use extreme examples to illustrate the point. But what about there's women that marry one alcoholic after another, and you go, well, what's going on there? Well, where do they meet them? Well, bars, of course. But I met my wife in a bar, and neither of us are alcoholics. But it's like gaydars, I guess, from across. Find each other. And the families can be one extreme or the other. Like I use myself as an example. In my family, nobody swore ever, and if you did, it was and my wife's family, it was the opposite. They all swore like sailors and everything like that. But she didn't, and I did. So it was kind of a strange. But it's the same. It's two sides of the same conflict
coin. Yeah,
the two sides of the same coin, and you can be at either side. And if you go back and forth, it can be a real mixed. Again, happy mediums. Yeah, you should be able to get angry without thinking that you're a sinner who's going to be God's going to hate or something like that. Sometimes and what do you do with the anger? Just people think that they have to act it out. Well, you can be angry and use it constructively. You don't have to. I remember when I was learning group therapy.
Oh yeah, for sure. You can definitely.
She said, they were all saying they can't express anger because they would all go out and start assassinating people and burning down government buildings.
No, use that anger for good. Use that
Right.
anger for good. The
Yes.
anger is such a strong emotion. Like every time I feel angry about something, I just use it to live out of spite. I've just gotta live better. Just you know what I mean? Just
Solve
yeah.
the problem. There's another fad in our field called mindfulness, which is great for the things that you can't fix. How to stay calm when there's something bad going on that you can't fix. But if there is something bad that you might be able to fix, then mindfulness is mindlessness. Basically, you can use it to stay calm while you're fixing the problem. But if all you're trying to do is relax and let the problem go on,
Yeah.
somebody made a comparison by, doctors these days with all the business people running their doctors, they're telling them they need to be mindfulness if they don't like what they're being told to do instead of forming a union or something, fixing it. I mean, that to me,
Yeah.
that doesn't make
Mindfulness is mindlessness. I
mindless.
love that quote. Yeah. I love that quote.
Not all of it. Not all. It can be. It's
Yeah.
useful for things you can't do anything about, right? Then you want to
Yeah.
stay relaxed. But where's that line? I'm
Yeah, for
kind of
sure.
getting off on tangents, but all this stuff kind of runs together, and there's all levels of severities
Yeah.
and combinations,
It's all connected.
and everybody's different. It's you look for, as a therapist, we look for patterns, but every family is completely different. They have the same themes, but they act it out very differently
In their own ways.
So it's hard to generalize in terms of the questions you're asking me about when it's going to be bad. It depends on a lot of other factors. Sometimes there's an old uncle that takes you in and treats you the right way.
Yeah. Well, are there any strategies or approaches that parents can use to transition from overprotective parenting to a more balanced and supportive parenting style? I'm aware it's not one size fits all, but is there anything that can be done?
Then you have to look at their own issues and not just the kid's behavior, I think. Okay.
And what will they have to take into account when thinking about
why are they so worried and guilty that their kid's going to turn out bad if they don't do everything perfectly? Where's that coming from? It sounds irrational, but there's got to be some logic to it because they keep doing it. So as it turns out, there are reasons why people feel like they have to do this stuff. And I think it has to do with the whole family dynamics that are going on, the messages they're getting from your parents and your in-laws. Again, as analytic therapists, they never even asked about that stuff.
And is there a second step after the self-reflection and identifying those issues?
Well, again, if it's fairly mild, you can read somebody like John Roseman. He's got a book called The Well-Behaved Child. She'll tell you what you should be doing. And if you find that you can't do it, and you can't do it for some reason, then you need to see a therapist. And if it's a marriage issue, you probably need to see a marriage counselor.
Yes.
All ties together.
Yeah, it all ties together. So in conclusion, what key message would you like our listeners to take away from this regarding the impact of overprotective parenting and the importance of finding a balanced approach to raising children?
The kids are not fragile. Okay, they can obviously get hurt, but we all seem to make it through to okay.
Yeah.
So the kid can stand to deal with things. Bullying is another big issue. What do you do about that? Especially when the parents are the bully are defending the. I mean, that's a lot of difficult situations, but you have to sort of keep an open mind and let yourself use critical thinking. Don't just follow along like sheep.
Yeah.
Tell everything that your friends are saying. They'll get on your case if you don't give them enough money. Well, you maybe want your kid to learn how to live on a budget. You don't want to give them, even if you can afford it. And they'll and your friends will get on your case. I've seen that. We've experienced that.
That's yeah.
It's just kind of keeping an open mind, reading, listening, and maybe you need some help for either marriage therapy or family therapy or just look into your own background. I've the book that you mentioned, my self-help book, talks about how to research your family background to find out where the conflicts that are creating the difficult behavior are coming from. Because in order to talk about it, you got to get past people's defenses, and people are extremely defensive. So you have to be empathic to somebody that you may feel like they're kind of kicking you in the knee, and it's pretty hard to be empathic with somebody when they're doing that. Not sympathetic. I distinguish between sympathy and empathy. Sympathy is I can understand why you felt like you had to do that, but it wasn't the right thing to do. Sympathy was not only was it, I understand it, but it was the right thing to do. Like child abuse. You can't, they know what people think of child abusers. You don't have to pretend like it's okay. It's not okay, but you can understand the bind that they felt in their own families that led them to behave that way. And there's various strategies for getting past, and there's not just one defense, but they have a whole series of them. So once you get past one, you have to go on. But that's coming from the adult child's point of view, not from the parents' point of view.
For sure. That's we'll link that book in and all the other books in our show notes below. So thank you for answering our questions. I feel like we got to have a really detailed conversation about this. Now we're moving on to the open mic section, and this is your opportunity to talk about whatever you're passionate about that doesn't have to be related to the topic. So the floor is yours. Take it away.
All right. Well, I've become kind of a critic of the mental health field because everything's all in your head now. It's got nothing to do with your interpersonal relationships. I think you can tell from listening to what I've talked to now, it's everything to do with your personal relationship. Yes, genes affect your behavior. But one of the things genes cause you to do is to be extremely sensitive to your parents' behavior. When babies and mothers are interacting, there are literally 700 connections between nerves in the brain formed every second. Okay. So we come into the world not knowing anything about how the universe operates. So you learn that from your parents, and they have a very strong influence on you. And even if you think you're rebelling, you're probably rebelling because you think they need a rebel. They need a black sheep, and you're volunteering, but you've got to fail at it to show that, the things that they kind of lived through you to feel it. It's a bad idea. You shouldn't do that. Okay. So everything's all in your head, and you get these these on the other side, you get these people saying, schizophrenia is just another way of looking at the universe. No, it's not. These people aren't in touch, so we've got all these homeless mentally ill in California, tent cities under every overpass. We used to have those people committed because they were called gravely disabled because of their psychotic. A lot of them, they were schizophrenia and stuff like that. So I got these two sides of our field. The one that doesn't think that anything's a mental illness, and the other thing that everything's a mental illness, and it's got nothing to do with what's going on. And humans are being the most social of all organisms, pretty much. Maybe, I don't know, ants or bees might have it on us a little bit, but we're extremely social, and groupthink is everywhere. I mean, if you can look at the politics, everybody's dividing up, and you can't disagree with anything they say, or you're excluded. That's not a good.
Yeah.
Either.
So what do you think? How do you think people can benefit from looking at their interpersonal relationships when thinking about their mental health?
Well, what's triggering you? And why is the other person doing it? And how are you interpreting it? Okay. And again, you can't read minds. So if it's something that's really irking you, you've got to be able to be assertive and speak up about it, but not tear them a new one, because that doesn't work.
Yeah, for sure. You've got to analyze your own triggers and figure out why the triggers for you, and it's not always like you can't hold other people accountable for.
Well, you could talk about an interpersonal pattern that you have and how you can fix it, because most of the time the other person isn't happy about it really either. that's where the empathy comes in. The minute you start attacking or even criticizing, you forget it. It's fight or flight is what's going to happen, or freeze. Nothing will ever get solved. And like I said, people are terrified of discussing these issues. The hardest thing I had was getting my self-destructive patients, even after we worked out the formula and understood why the parents were acting, to go actually do the homework and confront their parents in an empathic way. They were scared to death. If they did it, it was very successful, but a lot of times I couldn't get them to do it. People are absolutely terrified to do this. And people just don't like to talk about the past, especially because they're ashamed themselves.
Yeah, but you've got to talk about the past and think about the past because it affects you.
How it's affecting you now. It's the present that's important, but the past explains what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now.
Did you have any more to say for your open mic before we end off?
That's the main thing. I talk about a lot of these subjects online and stuff like that. So I have a blog and a Facebook page, so I talk a lot about these issues. So
amazing. So tell us a bit more. Where can our listeners find you on your blog and on your Facebook page?
Well, I'm on Psychology Today, although we just got into it a little bit. I've been on there for like 12 years, but they're starting to not let people express opinions about certain things. So I have my own blog where it has most of the same posts, but it's a broader one. It's at DM Allen at Blogspot. I can't even remember my own blog.
Don't worry about it. We'll find it and we'll link in the show notes.
And Facebook, I'm under David M. Allen, MD on Facebook. And and every time I post on my blog, I also put a link to it on my Facebook page.
All right, that's great. Thank you so much, David, for joining us today. We'll link in the show notes. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Thanks again for having me.
You've been listening to Raising Parents, the Parenting Science Insights podcast, produced by the Parenting Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people find it so that we can grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at pa.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Dina Sargent. Thanks for tuning in.